Today on Sagittarian Matters, we complain about ice cream, talk graphic memoir, history, confronting Zionism, and give advice on friends, leaving academia, tortoise food, and more with author and artist Solomon J. BRAGER. Stay tuned.
Sagittarian Matters, Sagittarian Matters, what's the matter with you? Sagittarian Matters.
Solomon J. BRAGER is a writer, teacher, and artist. They are currently a Jerome Hill Artists Fellow, a member of the Pinko magazine editorial collective, and the director of community engagement at Jewish Currents magazine. Sol joined me from their home in New York to discuss their new book, Heavyweight, a family story of Holocaust, empire, and memory. Now please enjoy my talk with Sol BRAGER. Sol BRAGER, welcome to Sagittarian Matters.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Friend to small dogs.
Oh my God, there's one here right now.
Cartoonist. Assumed grouch. Welcome. You're welcome here.
Thank you.
I only think that because I was looking at the list of things we had discussed that you were like, here's things I'm qualified to talk about. And amongst them was hating avocados, which I found really scandalous.
It is, yeah, it's one of my unappealing qualities. I find them to be like totally okay as a food. And then I go to a really dark place when I think about the politics of avocado farming. And so
what? Ruin it for me.
Well, so there are basically like cartels in Mexico that are working with these avocado conglomerates to like kill like eco warriors and like destroy butterfly environments and cut down forests so they can like farm avocados for the intense like avocado cravings of American hipsters.
Oh no.
And that makes me really upset. It's really terrible.
Aside from that, do you like the taste and texture?
They're like, it's like, okay, I like the texture. I find the taste to be like really whatever.
I feel this way that you feel about that. I feel this way when I see Driscoll strawberries anywhere, when I see bananas. I'm like, why do we get to eat bananas?
Mm.
And also when I see grapes. I have these pangs of
totally.
why am I allowed to buy this thing for so cheap? Why is this here?
Yeah. There was just a whole thing about Chiquita Banana like hiring death squads. It's pretty food politics are really upsetting, and I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to just like pick your things to be upset about within them, and then like ignore everything else. Otherwise, you can't eat anything.
Yeah, you can really. I've really had moments of tripping out. Because you trip. I mean, yeah, we could talk about it forever, but we're here to talk about something so much more light and fun, which is your new book, Heavyweight. Okay, Heavyweight is a giant, beautiful. Would you call it a graphic memoir because it's so historical? It's graphic nonfiction. Can you talk a little bit about the book and the genesis of the book?
Yeah. So Heavyweight is. Yeah, you can call it graphic nonfiction, graphic memoir. If Jen Camper gets really unhappy if you call it anything but a comic book, even though it's really long,
okay.
or a book of comic. And it is about my family's story of escaping from Nazi Germany. And then from there, my investigation of that history through all of these other connected histories, particularly settler colonialism and German colonization projects before the Holocaust. And basically, like, the book asks the question, what happens when you take the story that you've been given and unfold from there? What comes into focus? And I started working on the book in 2020. I had been teaching high school history, and I was kind of working on a graphic nonfiction book that was supposed to be educational about the history of settler colonialism. I had started working on it at a Center for Cartoon Studies summer workshop with Paul Karasik and Dan Knott, and and I had really like been thinking about this project as like part of my teaching, and then I got fired from my job because I tweeted that I didn't support ethno-nationalist settler colonialism, and also that I wasn't going to invite Zionists to my birthday party. Those were the two tweets that really did me in.
The birthday party tweet. They were like, the first one, we could have lived with that, but come on.
Yeah. There's like a really funny like screenshot of it where someone was like, this evil teacher didn't invite students to their birthday party. I was like, that we're not allowed to, nor do I want to invite students to my birthday party.
Does that person want their high school students at their birthday party? What are you talking about?
Really, I guess it's just everyone wants to feel included. And and I found myself in this like position where I was no longer a teacher, and still had all of this kind of like educational desire with myself and all of this like history that I was thinking about, and also was like thinking a lot about the circumstances both around my firing, which had a lot to do with the politics of Zionism, but particularly like intra-Jewish politics around Zionism, and then also just like my own sense of what I was and wasn't allowed to like respond to and be angry about, and like what was and wasn't a effective political strategy. Because like I don't think tweeting is a particularly good political strategy, and I also like probably said some things as I was getting fired, like particularly to my employers that like weren't totally strategic.
Like
Uh,
what? You got
I mean,
messy at the end?
a little messy. Like after I was already fired, and this is like a very publicized, but like basically the firing was like set in stone. It just like hadn't gone through yet. And I had to attend this assembly that I like worked really hard to get canceled, but it still happened, where a like Upper West Side New York rabbi told my students that the like greatest threat to like he was like, Palestinians kill Jewish babies, and the greatest threat to Jews today is the intersectional left. I was like, how is this anything but like racist propaganda and right-wing talking points?
Did you
And
say that?
I did say that many times, like to my employers, but at the time, my response was to from the back of the room. I like didn't like stand, I didn't like get on stage or anything, but I just like flipped him the bird and walked out of the auditorium and started screaming. And it was like this moment where like just the amount, and I like slammed the door of the auditorium. I did do that. Like, and I felt like very immature and like, just like angry in a way that I had like not felt for a really long time. And like frustrated, and so I've thought about this a lot of ways, particularly because like I've seen so many, like, yeah, I think people invest really heavily in the idea of like trusting your gut. And I've seen a lot of people have like very effective gut responses to things in recent days that I'm like, you really cannot trust the response that you're having, right? Like the fact that like, we like, I like was at a protest at the Jewish Museum, and people in the audience were like acting like their lives were in danger. They were like shaking with fear. And I was like, you need to train your body out of being afraid of people who disagree with you, right? Like that's not that's not like a feeling you can trust. But it was a feeling, that I had in this, not fear, but like, total frustration in that moment. And so I was thinking about my great grandfather, Eric Levy, who is the titular heavyweight of the book Heavyweight. who among he was a kind of interesting figure in my family because he was very wealthy. He like really didn't have to work. He like focused all of his energy as a young person into being an amateur heavyweight boxing champion in Germany in the 1920s, and like partying and you know looking hot and owning like a lot of clothes and cars and bulldogs. And and then when the Nazis started to come to power, he and his brother and other members of their Jewish sports club, Hakoah, would like go around and break up these Nazi meetings by beating people up. Like he was like a violent guy. He liked punching. And violence was what he turned to as a potential solution. And it like didn't necessarily like help per se, like it probably like felt really nice. But it was like what he had at his disposal. And in some ways it did end up like saving his life because he like basically as soon as the Nazis actually rose to power in 1933, everyone recognized that his life was in immediate danger, him and his brother. And so they got him out of the country in 33. And so he was like, until the Nazis invaded Belgium, which is where he was living, he was fine. And so I was thinking about the legacy that he left, both as a person who like maybe had an inappropriate but like honest response to things, and just like the kind of vibe that he imbued, in his children that was like passed down to my mother that I think is passed down to me, which is like, a level of sort of stubbornness and responsiveness that can be very noble and also very annoying. And started drawing a comic about it, right? And so the comic which was published in Jewish Currents magazine in 2020, was like asking if rage could be an inherited trait, and was thinking both about like my response to Zionism and also my experience of like getting into boxing, which I haven't done for a long time, but back in the day I was very into boxing. And after that comic was finished, I was like, there's actually like a lot more questions that I have here. So I started investigating those questions and it turned into, a 300-page book with like a lot of pages cut from it, honestly. So
I'm sure.
yeah.
What was in the entire book, we talk about your relationship to hand traditional
Traditional. Yeah.
traditional cartooning versus digital art. How much of this was done by hand and how much of this was kind of manipulated using Photoshop or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the process that I undertook to do the comic, almost all of my pencils were done digitally, on a tablet. And so, I found that like the things that were really helpful for that was like being able to rearrange panels and drag stuff. And then also at a certain point, I realized that I could clone faces, and then like change the expressions on them. A thing that I both like and also find frustrating about my own cartooning is that like no one ever looks exactly the same. Like I have a really hard time with consistent character design.
I love
And
that because I
sometimes
felt
I want to
alone.
lean into that, and sometimes
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. There's like I think like two types of cartoonists, right? There's like the like no two faces are the same, and then there's like the every face is the same. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's a middle ground, but for me, the middle ground was like literally copy pasting. And so especially as I like, was getting like hundreds of pages in and was like trying to find ways to like make my life easier. Um, but there were a few reasons why I didn't want to do the whole book on Procreate. One is that my background, the way that I started doing comics was on paper with nib pens and with, ballpoint pens and like drawing just like on computer paper, right? Like I don't have a fine art background, and I certainly don't have a graphic design or like digital art background. And uh, drawing digitally is still very new to me. It's something that I always feel a little like iffy about the final results of. Like I see other people's comics and I'm like, how did you do that? Like what pen pack did you buy? Like I don't like what are your settings? I just finally bought that thing, the like paper cover that makes it more like paper. So we'll see how that goes. And then also I find that I push really hard. And so it like really bothers my carpal tunnel. Um, and so I did the pencils that way, and then I printed everything out. And then I painted the whole book with ink wash and hand lettered the whole book on watercolor paper. Um, and
The
there,
hand lettering is pretty intense for
that
any.
also really was bad for my carpal tunnel, I have to say.
And wait, did you draw it at size or did you draw it bigger? I can't remember.
Bigger. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
bigger.
that's
Yes.
better for lettering.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's no way I would have been able to do it. And there was a little bit of a hope and a prayer element. Like I knew they were printing it at 6x9 and I was drawing at like 11x14 or something. And I did try to do a couple of like test photocopies, but I was like, I think if I do the lettering at this size, it will be neither too large nor too small. I find that a lot of comics, the words are just so tiny that
Yeah.
like, you know, I don't want to have to like squint at my own book. Um, yeah, I think like probably the wildest choice that I made was to also hand letter a lot of the newspaper articles that I included.
That's the
Um,
part that's really intense to look at because it has all the serifs. It has all like the little like caps on the bottom, like it's the font of the newspaper that you have replicated. It's very technical looking. It looks terrific. And as I was looking at that, knowing it was hand lettered, I was like, whoa. Because I did that for like 1 or 2 pages in one of my books. And I remember being like, woo, woof. But
yeah.
you did a lot more.
Yeah, it is like I was tracing it. And so there was something that was really like calming and beautiful about it. And the reason that I started doing it was because a lot of the sources that I was finding in archives are just really low res. Honestly, it was like the reason that I thought about photoshopping some of those documents in, and they looked bad. And I personally don't love the style of like nonfiction comics where things are just like kind of stuck on it, or like they will like throw photos in randomly. Like I think sometimes it works, but it's just not what I like in comics. That said, there are like a couple places where I did Photoshop in documents because I just like could not figure out another way to, like, they were just impossible to draw.
Mhm.
And just tried to make them like so high contrast that you like can't, there's like plausible deniability.
Today's episode is brought to you by Christy Herod and the honorary Sagittarians of Patreon. You can support the podcast and access early and bonus episodes by going to patreon.com/NicoleJGeorges and becoming an honorary Sagittarian today for only $6 a month. Can you even believe? And for just a little more, we'll say your name on the show. Details at patreon.com/NicoleJGeorges. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to saying your name on the podcast. Producer Ponyo looks forward to it too. Don't be scared. It's just Ponyo's speaking voice. You have this academic background, this research background, and then I know that you were being pushed to put more of yourself in the book as the book went on. How did it go for you adding yourself? I guess I have 2 questions. One, how did it go adding yourself? How much of yourself to add and what parts of your own story did you want to add? And the other part is, we've both worked for the Nib before, and Larry Harris has been on the show, and is my friend who is an editor there, and has always said, like, when I'm looking at one of these journalism comics, I'm always thinking, why is this a comic? Why is
Mhm.
this not just an article? And so I wonder, what choices did you make of how to sort of um, synthesize the information, or what choices did you make of what information to be visual,
Mm.
and how you would display everything, and then also how much of yourself to put in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Set of questions. And Illyria's like an amazing editor. She was the editor on the first comic that I did for the Nib. Um, how Live Journal Me, or was like, it was just Live Journal Made Me Gay was the name of it. Yeah. um, and another editor who will remain unnamed was like, I don't know, I think it should be Live Journal Made Me Trans because that's more accurate. And I was like, okay. I really need someone to go to bat for me because that is not a good joke. And Illyria was like, no, gay is the joke. Like,
Thank God.
yeah. um, but I also have that question like for myself and for comics often, like why a comic? Why not another, form of writing or form of craft? And I think that that question also is like funny to it's funny to see how it kind of like comes out in some of the responses to the book that I'm already getting. Like there were a couple of Goodreads reviews before I stopped reading them, which I do not do anymore.
I'm like, get out of there. It's a horrible neighborhood to be
Like
in.
literally the book came out yesterday and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I'm out. But these responses that were like, this book is very much like a dissertation, it's like there's so much content and so much information. And I was like, "Whoo, buddy, you don't want to see my actual dissertation." Like, there are some choices that I made that are like, okay, how can I sort of just give the reader a sense of the information that they need to know to sort of understand the context of the story that I'm telling, or to get at some um, of the historical events that are happening, um, without going like really in depth in a way that I would in a historical article, for example, or a peer reviewed paper or whatever. And then also some of the choices that I made were around whether or not to include visual representations of violence, because a lot of my academic work is actually about about photography and genocide and film and genocide. I'm like constantly looking at truly like the most horrible images which I mean, frankly, right now with the genocide in Gaza, everyone is looking at the most horrible images you could possibly imagine, unless you've, managed to like completely silo your social media to only show you like cheery, Hezbollahist imagery. But um, but yeah, like for my work, I am like constantly looking at stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so um those are bad comics. Like I think they're unethical comics, frankly. Like I'm not going to draw a genocide. And so like thinking about what belongs in the realm of comics and what belongs in the other types of work that I do. Um and I think that like a thing that was really helpful or interesting with that was like there were kind of three threads in the book in terms of those treatments. One is like these are archival materials where sitting with them through a visual arts practice is helping me engage with them further. And I found that to be true with some of the archival documents that I was redrawing, where I both think that like it is interesting to be able to see them visually in addition to like hearing about them in writing, which of course you can do with like, photos or film or whatever. But then I got to sit with them for much longer because I was rehand lettering them. um, and and then also with some of the like film and photography stuff that I was working with, like I was painting stills of some of the film footage that I was watching. And so that was like a really interesting way for me to like sit with it and sit with the feelings that were like being brought up by watching some of this stuff. Um, and then another sort of vein is like that I think that a great thing about comics is that they can be funny and weird and, you know, uncomfortable. And like there's a long history of comics, including humor and
Yeah.
horror and pathos and like and absurdity. And so, you know, even though this is a nonfiction comic, because it's a comic, I felt comfortable doing things like telling a ridiculous story about like clipping my fingernails with safety scissors at Hebrew school while watching a documentary about the Shoah, or including the actual ghost of my great grandfather appearing and making fun of me in a nonfiction book project, which you cannot do in a peer reviewed paper. Like, or, you know, having a scene where I'm like literally hanging my mother's like dirty laundry out of the window, you know. So these things that you can do that feel very cartoonish to me in comics, that for me feel really crucial to this project. Like they're like what allow me to do it. They're like a thing that makes it a comic for me. Um, and then also, which I don't think this is specific to comics, but I do know that it's not a part of like traditional history work. This ability to engage differently in a type of fictioning where I am like literally writing the actual like a story, right? So it's like I have a set of historical circumstances, I have testimony, I have archival documents, and then I'm trying to translate it into a narrative. Um, in a way that, yeah, to me, like, you know, I mean, maybe if I was like a historical, if I was a documentarian, we'll say, if I was like working in film, then it would be a movie, right? But
Right.
like, I draw, I draw pictures.
I mean, I actually want my head falls off when people are like, "Why comics? Does the art come first or the writing?" I'm just like,
That is
"Please,
funny.
no more, no more." But I was, you know, because I do think about that O'Leary question all the time when I'm doing stuff where I'm like, okay, is there something I can do with comics that I
Yeah.
couldn't do if this was one of these other things? Um, we have so many nonsensical things to talk about, but I wanted to know, I guess did you end up feeling, you know, and I know that, um, so adding the humorous parts, adding these little kind of anecdotal snippets and like ghosts, that helps like kind of break up the monotony of, because drawing a comic is boring.
Yeah.
Drawing, like, so what were those the moments? What were the things that were kind of like your dessert, or the things that kind of made you a little, what are you excited to draw? Like, I love drawing shine spots on black hair, and I'll save that on a page. So the last, I'm like, oh, look who gets to do this, you know?
That's so funny. Yeah, I think that like I know that this is deranged, but like honestly, one of my favorite things to do is that like totally mindless tracing where I'm like doing the lettering in an article, or you know, there is just like a lot of line work to do where I'm just like kind of following a line.
Mhm.
And also doing like huge swaths of black. That's another thing that like a lot of people will Photoshop a black background in.
Yeah,
Um, and like, why would you take away from yourself the incredible pleasure of just like filling in an empty background with black paint?
I
Like, that is
agree.
so fun. It's the best. It's delightful.
It
Uh,
is the best. And then
yeah.
if you mess up, it just gives you one more task to do, which is
Oh,
just
yeah.
doing a little cleanup.
Yeah. And I've like done, you know, I've done the thing where I've like knocked over a bottle of ink. I've like stuck my arm on wet ink and like smeared it across the page, you know, I've done
Yeah.
everything. Um, yeah, but I also I really like there's a few pages, especially the like film still pages where I decided to not work from pencils at all. I just like went right to ink, and they're like kind of like looser and just all ink wash. And those were really fun for me to do. And felt like more like a, I think because of my like history background, and because most of the comics I make now are in a like op comic space, or like a journalism comic space, just like getting to make something that felt a little bit more like art, um was, yeah, really really lovely.
It's such a relief. Like when someone's like, I remember just the feeling of making the title page or possible title pages for my books felt like a moment of real relief. I was like, oh my gosh, I get to make an image that's huge. That's not a million tiny images. And it gets to be my interpretation of what's happening in this book.
Yeah. Did you just get to like draw a bunch of pictures and then present options, or?
I think so. I think like for Fetch, I know I have like 3 or 4 different sketches that I showed them, and then they chose one. And then that's what I did.
Yeah. My publisher, they were like, here's your cover. And I had to be like, absolutely not.
What was
Like,
it?
okay, it was like a panel that they had pulled from the book. So I was
That's so
already
weird.
like, we're not repeating imagery from inside the book on the cover. And then also weirdly, they had like split the cover in half, and half of it was like the background, and half of it was yellow, and half of it was blue. And I was like, why is there a Ukrainian flag on the cover of my book? Like, I mean, it's already, it would be kind of a weird vibe, but like, there's nothing even slightly Ukrainian about anything in this book. Like, so I immediately was like, we're not doing that now. But then we went back and forth a lot. Like,
Really?
really, yeah, yeah.
I had a cover approved for Calling Dr. Laura, and I loved it. And then I realized I had stolen it from another book. There's
Mm.
a book called Escape from Special. And I can't remember the person's name right now, but it's such a great book. And I realized I just basically copied that cover without knowing it. And so they were like, okay, you're all approved. And I was like, hold on a second. I copied that cover. We have to
That's
do it.
very, that's very ethical of you. I like the cover that I wanted to do, I think was pretty much totally scammed from like a George Bellows painting. And I was just like, I am a scammer, like
Yeah.
scam away.
I mean, it just felt like too close. Like I think that book had even come out recently, and I was like, oh yeah, I just stole this from somebody else. And then Fetch that cover, they just immediately were like, yeah, that's great, done deal. We've never
Well, that's
approved a
great.
cover so easily, and I was like, great. But the designer at Mariner where I was working we were kind of in line. Like there were no like bad versions that they sent me that I had to fight through.
Yeah. This is like related to the question that you had that I don't think I answered about being asked to like put myself in the book more.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing with the cover where I like presented this cover that, was like kind of abstract and like painterly, or like, had a lot of black on it, and they were like, you need to be on the cover. You're like the person that the reader is following. A memoir has to have a protagonist. And I was like, okay, but you were the one who told me that it was a memoir. Like, and it was really interesting to like constantly be like, okay, it wasn't actually as hard as I thought it would be, in the sense that like when they were like, you have to put yourself in it, at first I thought they meant, and I think there's like some vestiges of this, that they meant like you have to tell your life story. And they would have liked that, but they were like happy with me being like, I'm the one doing this research, and it's like through the lens of like my experience. And like this research is about people that I know, and here's how I'm responding to it. And it just like provides the reader, yeah, like a little bit of like a life raft in the like sea of history that I'm throwing at you.
I mean, I did really like having you as our guide through all of
Good,
this.
good. I'm glad. Yeah.
You were the touchstone. You were the guide.
Yeah. I've also heard that my boyfriend Charles is very helpful as like a sense of relief for my incredible pathos throughout the
I agree. Dear Sagittarian Matters, I have some very dear Jewish friends who, prior to October 7th and right around that time, expressed some pretty big feelings around protecting Israel and feeling afraid of anti Semitism. These friends have been completely silent as the genocide has gone forward. Would you approach these friends? Would you keep them as friends? How do you exist together after a war? Signed, Wondering in Wichita.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really hard. I wish I could like ask follow-up questions, because I think that um silence is like in some ways easier to intervene in on an interpersonal level than like really like outspoken pro-war, pro-genocide, pro-apartheid state rhetoric.
Yeah.
I think like if you love someone and you want to keep them in your life, you have to like be willing to ask them some questions and push them. Um, but I also like, I think I struggle a lot. There's a sort of like racial justice education missive, particularly for white people, that's like you have to gather your own people and like get their shit together for the rest of us. Like it's not people of color's responsibility to make white people better. It's like white people who are allies or accomplices to do that work. And or with Zionism, I really want to be able to do that. And also, like, when I get a message that's like, we should kill everyone in Gaza, there's like no innocent people there or whatever, like maybe not word for word, but that's like
Yeah.
essentially what it's saying. It's very hard to be like, I'm going to like make space for you so we can like work through your like genocidal feelings together to like get to a place where you don't want to mass kill people. So it's really hard. And I also think that like that project or the interpersonal projects and the project of sort of like saving the ethical soul of the Jewish people, which I personally feel very committed to as someone who works in professional Jewish spaces and like drew a whole comic book about this, is like very separate from the project of both Palestinian liberation and also ending the genocide in Gaza. And those projects are much more urgent and more important and more crucial in this moment. And so it's like if you have energy to either like try to get your Jewish friends together or to like do anything you can to like fundraise for Gazan refugees or like call your, like the small things that we can do to like put our bodies and time on the line. I would like do those things instead, like in terms of priorities.
I think that's a really good answer. I don't actually have an answer to this. It feels so big and it involves things that people have been told their entire lives.
Yeah.
So, like, unpacking that together feels really hard and complicated and kind of a long form project that involves a lot.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of like book projects and media projects where and like organizations like JVP have resources around this. That's just like people narrating how they got from point A of, Zionist indoctrination or whatever to point B of Palestine solidarity or like not being a Zionist. And I think like in some ways just sort of like pushing those resources to people is kind of helpful because when you have a narrative path to follow, like, as people needed me to be their guide through the book, like I think having a guide through that process can be a way of helping people unentrench themselves.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, next question. Dear Sagittarian Matters, should I leave academia? Is it even possible? It's actually what I want to do, but is there life after academia? I've invested so much time and money and so many years into this. Thanks. Signed, stuck in Sedona. I am an adjunct. I have no job security or insurance through my employer, but I do feel like when I float in somewhere, sometimes people like grab my rags as I'm leaving. They're like, how did you get out? Can I leave? How can I get out of here? Like people who are just like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt who are like, I just worked for so long to do this job and I'm miserable, but this is the thing I just invested my life in. I
Yeah.
feel a little bit like I represent freedom in some way, but also for me, that comes with like hustling, like a
Right.
life of hustling.
Yeah, there's a lot of insecurity and freedom. And I mean, I feel that way having taken a full-time job outside of academia that's not in comics, right? Where I'm like, I've given up my freedom to like draw all day for like to have healthcare. And that's what I was doing before I was adjuncting. And I really like, I did invest in the academic path. Like I did a PhD, I went on the job market. And like, frankly, academia rejected me in many ways. Like they were like, we'll publish your articles, we'll take your teaching labor. You can do all of the things that professors do, but we're not going to give you a job. And
Mm.
so, you know, which is like, I think most people's experience. And like, in that case, like, unless it's supporting something else that you do, like, you know, like, I'm assuming the reason that you adjunct is because it is like helping support all of the other incredible work that you're doing that is like really the bulk of your labor and the bulk of your practice, right? Like, then, you know, if it works for you, it works for you. If it's not working for you, then like get out. That is like an abusive relationship with the industry that you're in. But especially if you've done a PhD, it means that you've had like, you know, 6 to 12 years of like of indoctrination, of like being told that like this is the way, this is the path, like this is how you get and I think it really rewires your brain for like very specific types of reward,
Mm.
that like kind of, and also like specific types of like temporality that like only exist in academia. And you really do have to like tear yourself out of it. Like, I don't know, I'm like, maybe you need to like hire, first I was gonna be like, hire a therapist who will like help you get out. And I'm like, maybe hire a culty programmer to
Yeah,
help you.
I just thought that as you
Like,
were saying, I'm like, they should hire someone that's familiar with cult deprogramming because it
yeah.
really is.
It really is. And it's also like it's really like a cult in the sense that like it has a finite timeline. Like academia is on its way out. Like the university, I mean, the university as like a stable, good employer has been out for a long time. Um, and so you're like buying into like a rotting carcass, you know, like it's real rough out there. And like, you know, I mean, there's a reason that like drinking the Kool-Aid is not like a good thing in the like that's how you know,
Yeah,
die.
that's it. Then you put on your Nikes and then that's it.
Yeah. Ugh.
Okay, so just get out and you will can you just affirm that there are other jobs in the world?
Oh yeah, there's so many other jobs. Like there's really more jobs outside of academia than in academia by like a lot.
There's a lot of jobs. And you
There's
will
a lot.
get one of them if
Yeah.
you can even make your own.
Yeah. And also like a lot of people who like we're at a point in the history of academia where so many people have been pushed out or have been incentivized to leave, that people are creating projects outside of academia that are doing intellectual and creative work and teaching work, and publishing work that like comes with better job conditions, better labor conditions. And so like finding or starting those projects as an alternative to the university is, I think, a really good way to continue doing the type of to continue doing the things that like brought you into academia without having to put up with the like abuse of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Let's do just a little rapid fire food talk. Can you tell me about Van Leeuwen?
Oh my God. Ah! Okay.
If you had 2 minutes to
Yeah.
summarize what you
Like
think about Van Leeuwen.
so I used to love Van Leeuwen. Like, I mean, I'm divorced, but like after my city hall wedding, we like went to Van Leeuwen, you know, like I love Van Leeuwen. And
Can you tell people what that is if they don't live on the
yeah,
coast?
yeah, totally. So Van Leeuwen, and you know, I mean, it's increasingly available, which is actually part of my complaint. Like you can find it at Walmart. Um, Van Leeuwen is a ice cream company that started as like a small company in New York. It was an ice cream truck. And the reason that I like Van Leeuwen is because they used to make the best vegan ice cream. It was like made of cashews. It was delicious. It wasn't like full of ice crystals. And like, I am not vegan. I have a vegan boyfriend and I like try to eat in a way that doesn't like, you know, destroy the planet. And so when I'm given, like, this is like the Impossible Burger thing, like present me with like an Impossible Burger and I will stop eating meat burgers, you know, like also show me 5 pictures of cows and I'll start eating meat burgers.
Yeah.
But like, but like, it's you want to have the good alternative. And they had the good alternative. It was like good ice cream.
Hmm.
And instead of just continuing to make delicious ice cream, they've done like, and also like I can't eat gluten. And so they've done like several things that are really frustrating. One is all of their vegan flavors, like for some reason have cake in them. Like now they're like constantly shoving, they're like Cold Stone creamery themselves.
Nobody wants
And
cake.
no one wants cake. It's like, it's not, I mean, I do want cake, but I don't want it in my ice cream. It's soggy and weird. It's like claggy, bad cake. And, and then also they stopped doing cashew cream and to doing cashew ice cream. Now everything's like coconut or whatever. So it's not as good. And they also like have stopped making as many vegan flavors in general. And the reason that they've done this is so they can invest in expanding their company, both to have like scoop shops all over the country and also to do all of these like weird co-branded flavor. Like they did like a Kraft macaroni and cheese flavor that are like only available at Walmart. And
Gross.
like, yeah, so like capitalism has destroyed ice cream again. It's so
Again.
frustrating. And they stopped having vegan whipped cream. How are we to get our vegan mini sundae? Should split.
I mean, what's the point of drawing in vegans and then being like, thanks, we don't need you anymore?
It's really disrespectful is what it is.
Go ahead and say it.
I feel personally disrespected by Van Leeuwen, and I feel like they've done an actual harm to my family. So
Yeah. Their banana ice cream, I probably read about it in the New York Times or something because I remember reading the recipe, reading about how elaborate their roasted banana caramelization process was. And I was like, oh, I must go. And so anytime I was in New York, I would go to Van Leeuwen. It was incredible. I'd stand in a long line for Van Leeuwen. It was incredible. I love banana ice cream. And then everything now is at a point where it all tastes the same and it all tastes a little too sweet.
yeah.
And I
And
just,
yeah, there's another company that I really want to support because they're trying to do vegan gelato. And they have it at the Cyclone Stadium in Coney Island, our minor league baseball team. It's called like Common Meadows Creamery or something, but it's the same thing. All of the flavors are really gentle and they're all too sweet. So I kind of want to like write them an email that's like, if you just punch up the bitterness, take down the sugar, like matcha needs to taste like matcha.
please write them
taste like snozberries, like
the snozberries. They write them a handwritten letter so they know that you are like 150 years old in your heart.
I'll use my nib pen. So it, like,
use
really,
your nib pen, and I'll co-sign on that. Okay, my last advice question for you is from me. Tell me if you can help me out. So I have a tortoise, as you may or may not know. A tortoise is vegan, not ethically vegan, but they just are naturally vegetables. So for the tortoise, I buy like arugula, lettuce, mustard greens, cucumber. But I'm having a mental block where now I see that food as tortoise food. So when I open the crisper drawer and I'm hungry and I'm like, oh, I could put a cucumber in this, I'm like, oh, gross. That's for the tortoise. Like, gross. That's tortoise food. And so I need a new mental trick to play on myself so I'm not like grossed out feeling like I'm eating off the tortoise's plate, if that makes sense.
That is so funny. Okay. I mean, the thing that came to mind, which I think is specifically about cucumbers, is like, because I'm not like a huge cucumber person, but I don't know if you've seen the videos of like spiralized cucumbers. So like the thing that I've been doing a lot, and I like to take to the beach, especially, is getting the little Persian cucumbers. And you do this thing where you like put a chopstick on either side of it and you slice down horizontally and then like not all the way through because the chopstick stops the knife, and then you flip it over and then you do a 45-degree angle down it, and then when you lift the cucumber up, it like falls down in a beautiful connected spiral. And then I'll dress those in like it's like rice vinegar, soy sauce, gochujang, like a little bit of sugar and salt, and like chili powder and garlic powder. And then it like is no longer a food that your beautiful, what's your tortoise's name?
Hermes.
Hermes. It's no longer Hermes food.
It's my
not
food.
Yeah.
Maybe to piggyback on that, I could get a pack of Persian cucumbers. And so part of them are mine and part of them are hers. And we
That's
just have separate foods in the fridge. And so I'm like, I'm eating my cucumbers. I'm eating them my way. And then I'm
Yeah.
eating them like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like, in the way that like sometimes kids need to like have their like food made in the shape of flowers or something,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe just to be like, you get food that is like normal food and I get food that is like punched up, or
Yeah.
or I don't know if there's like, maybe there's like some leafy greens that you can like make just yours, like I don't know if there's, I'm like trying to think
It's
of
like
other.
she can't eat spinach. So I'll
Yeah.
get spinach and be like, this is my food.
Wait, she really can't eat spinach?
No, the things they can't eat is ridiculous. I want to write a letter to the editor. It's like they can't eat cabbage, they can't eat spinach, but they can eat romaine and they can eat lettuce. Like it's like I can't remember if they can eat parsley or not, but like they can eat arugula, maybe cilantro. I can't remember. It's really, it feels almost arbitrary. It feels like rude.
Yeah, that is kind of rude. Yeah, I think arugula is like my favorite green, so I would be sad if I didn't eat it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm like, what if you got like a really nice head of like iceberg and made like a wedge salad? Because
Whoa.
Hidden Valley Ranch makes vegan ranch
They
dressing
do?
now. Yeah.
You might be like introducing like a Midwestern, like a moment to my Midwestern past, a door that I never went through.
That's so funny. I mean, I do like I'm not from the Midwest, and yet like I'm obsessed with hot dish. I do like a chickpea hot dish.
Wait, what's a hot dish? What do you put in a hot dish? That's like
Okay.
a casserole?
Yeah, it's like a casserole. So someone from like Minneapolis is like gonna come for me, but
Okay.
it's, to me, in my mind, it's like a casserole, but the thing that makes it hot dish is that there's a layer of tater tots on top.
Oh yeah, I've got
Yeah.
tater tots right now.
So there's, I think I got this recipe from Molly Yee, who is like mostly a baker, but it was like, it's harissa hot dish where it's like a harissa chickpea layer, and then I think I put like eggplant and stuff in it, and then yeah, the tater tots on top. Like really, just honestly, everything is better with tater tots.
Sagittarian Matters is hosted and produced by me, Nicole J. Georges, with help from Ponyo Georges. Our executive producer is Chris Sutton. Our editor is Shauna Polly, and our intern is Gigi Peloso. Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs composed and performed our theme music. Please leave your 5-star reviews for us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Find us on Instagram at Sagittarian Matters, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Nicole J. Georges. Thanks for listening. See you next time.